Hello, friend. Welcome to another quiet night together. Some nights when the world feels too heavy, we look up, not for answers, just to remember how small we are, how brief, how beautifully temporary. And there among all those distant lights, one glows a little differently. Not white, not blue, but red. Soft, ancient, and strangely familiar, as if it's been watching us. As long as we've been watching it. Mars. The red planet, the rust world, the mirror we've gazed into for centuries, wondering the same question over and over. Are we alone? What if life doesn't always look like us? What if it doesn't need forests or oceans or birdsong? What if life is quieter than we imagined, hidden beneath dust, sleeping in ice, breathing in ways we've only just begun to understand? Before we drift together tonight, if you find peace in these slow, starlit journeys, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe if you'd like more stories, told softly, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. Thank you, truly, for being here. Now, let's drift. Tonight we'll walk across another world, not with boots and flags, but with curiosity and wonder. We'll trace the memory of rivers that flowed billions of years ago. We'll listen to whispers trapped in methane and salt. We'll meet microbes that could survive where nothing else can. And we'll ask gently whether Mars ever knew what it was like to be alive. You don't need to understand everything. Just rest and let the questions carry you. Because Mars isn't just a planet, it's a story, a riddle written in red dust and frozen water, a place that might have once been like here. When you look at Mars through a telescope, it doesn't look like much. A small reddish dot, quiet, cold, empty. But scientists suggest that 3.8 billion years ago, Mars looked very different. There were oceans, not small puddles, but vast bodies of water stretching across the northern hemisphere, the kind of oceans that could swallow continents. Research shows that Mars once held enough water to cover its entire surface in a layer 450 feet deep. Imagine that, an entire world drowning in possibility. The sky wasn't the pale pink it is today. It was thicker, denser, protected by a magnetic field that wrapped around the planet like invisible armor, shielding it from the violence of the sun, and the temperature warmer. Not tropical, but livable. Scientists believe Mars may have been wet and warm enough for liquid water to pool flow and perhaps nurture something small. It seems as though Mars once breathed the way Earth breathes now. But then something changed. Around 4 billion years ago, Mars lost its magnetic field. No one knows exactly why. Perhaps its molten core cooled too quickly. Perhaps the planet was just too small to hold on to the heat that keeps a world alive. Without that magnetic shield, the solar wind, a stream of charged particles from the sun, began stripping away the Martian atmosphere, layer by layer, year by year, for millions of years. The air thinned, the water evaporated or froze. The rivers stopped flowing, the oceans sank into the ground or escaped into space. Mars didn't die suddenly. It faded, slowly, quietly, like a breath held too long. And what was left? Dust. Iron oxide covering the surface, rusting in the thin air, painting the entire planet red. A world that once lived, now sleeps in silence. But here's the thing, Mars didn't forget. Not entirely. When NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter began mapping the planet in high resolution, scientists found something remarkable. Carved into cliffs and canyon walls were ancient riverbeds, deltas where water once spilled into lakes. Minerals that only form in the presence of liquid water, clays, sulfates, carbonates. Some of these formations are found in a place called Gale Crater, a massive impact basin 96 miles wide. Inside that crater, NASA's Curiosity rover discovered layered rocks that tell a story. Each layer is a page in Mars's history, and those pages say the same thing: water was here. Not for days, for millions of years. There was even a lake, Scientists estimate it existed for tens of millions of years, fed by streams flowing down from the crater's rim, long enough for chemistry to happen, long enough perhaps for something to begin. Does that mean life existed there? We don't know, not yet, but the conditions were right. And on Earth, wherever we find liquid water that lasts, we find life. Let me ask you something. Have you ever thought about how strange water is? It's just 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, simple, common. But it's also the reason you're here, the reason anything is here. Water is a solvent. It dissolves, things carries them, mixes them. It's the stage where chemistry becomes biology, where molecules meet bond and sometimes become something more. On Earth, life began in water, maybe in a shallow tide pool warmed by the sun. Maybe in a hydrothermal vent deep in the ocean, where heat and minerals bubbled up from the planet's core. We don't know exactly where, but we know water was there. And Mars had water. For a long, long time. That's why scientists keep going back. That's why rovers crawl across its surface, drilling into rocks, sniffing the air, measuring the soil. Because if Mars once had the ingredients for life, maybe it also had life. There's a word scientists use when they talk about places where life could exist. They call it habitable. Habitable doesn't mean comfortable. It doesn't mean green fields and blue skies. It just means the basic ingredients are there. Water, energy, organic molecules, time. Mars in its ancient past was habitable. That much we know. But here's where it gets tricky. Habitable doesn't always mean inhabited. You can have a house with heat and water and food in the fridge, but that doesn't mean someone lives there. So the question isn't just, could life have existed on Mars? The question is, did it? And if it did, where did it go? Did it die when the water disappeared? Did it migrate underground, following the moisture as it sank deeper and deeper into the crust? Or did it adapt the way life on Earth adapts, finding ways to survive in places we once thought were lifeless? Some scientists believe that if life ever began on Mars, it might still be there. Not on the surface is brutal. Freezing temperatures at night, radiation from the sun with no atmosphere to block it, dust storms that can last for months. But beneath the surface, that's different. Underground, the temperature is more stable. The rock shields you from radiation. And if there's water trapped in ice, well, ice can melt. It seems as though Mars might still be breathing, just very, very quietly. Let's talk about Earth for a moment. Because Earth has something to teach us about Mars, there are places on our planet that seem impossible. The dry valleys of Antarctica, where it hasn't rained in 2 million years. The Atacama Desert in Chile, where some weather stations have never recorded rainfall. Deep ocean vents where the water is hot enough to melt, lead, and the pressure would crush you instantly. And yet, life is there. Microbes. Tiny, stubborn, brilliant little organisms that don't care about our definitions of too cold or too hot or too dry. They just persist. One of my favorite examples is a bacterium called Deinococcus radiodurans. Scientists sometimes call it Conan the bacterium because it can survive radiation doses 3,000 times stronger than what would kill a human. You could blast it with gamma rays, freeze it, dry it out, and it would still find a way to repair its DNA and keep going. Why does that matter for Mars? Because Mars is a radiation-soaked frozen desert. And if life like Deinococcus can survive on Earth, then maybe something similar could survive on Mars. Life doesn't ask for comfort, it only asks for a chance. Here's something that surprised me when I first learned it. The distance between Earth and Mars changes constantly. Sometimes they're close, about 34 million miles apart. Sometimes they're on opposite sides of the sun, over 140 million miles away. But even at their closest, Mars is still unimaginably far. If you could drive there at highway speed, it would take you over 50 years. If you flew on the fastest rocket we have ever built, it would still take about 6 months. And yet, we've been watching Mars for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians called it Horus of the horizon, the red one. The Babylonians named it after Nergal, their god of war and destruction. The Greeks saw it as Ares, the Romans Mars, always red, always associated with fire-blood conflict. Because even with the naked eye, even from millions of miles away, you can see that it's different, that it glows with a color no other planet shares. And now, in the 21st century, we're not just watching anymore. We're listening, touching, tasting, trying to read the story written in its dust. Scientists suggest that the key to understanding Mars isn't just looking at what it is now, it's understanding what it used to be. Imagine you walked into an abandoned house. The windows are broken, the roof is caved in. There's dust on everything, and the walls are crumbling. You might think this place was never anything. But then you look closer. You find a photograph on the floor, a child's drawing on the wall, a garden outside overgrown, but still there with roses trying to bloom through the weeds. And suddenly you realize, this wasn't always empty. People lived here, laughed here, dreamed here. That's what scientists are doing on Mars. They're not just cataloging rocks. They're reading a history, a biography of a planet that might have once been alive in ways we're only beginning to imagine. There's something deeply human about this, don't you think? This need to know if we're alone. We send machines millions of miles away, not for gold or oil or land, but for an answer to a question we've been asking since we first looked up at the stars. Is there anyone else out there? And maybe the answer is no. Maybe Mars is and always has been silent. But maybe the answer is yes. Or maybe the answer is something we haven't even thought of yet. Maybe life isn't just about cells and DNA and metabolism. Maybe it's about the way a planet remembers, the way chemistry becomes complexity, the way dust holds the memory of rivers and rocks hold the memory of rain. Mars might not have forests, but it has stories. And tonight, we're here to listen. So, take a breath. Let the weight of your body settle into the stillness, because we're just beginning. And the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. In the next part of our journey, we'll step back even further in time. Back to when Mars wasn't red but blue, when rivers carved through valleys and rain fell from clouds, when the planet was young and anything seemed possible. We'll walk along the shores of an ancient ocean that no longer exists. We'll trace the paths of deltas and floods, and we'll ask if water flowed here for millions of years. What else might have been flowing with it? The story of Mars is the story of water, and water, as we know, is the story of life. Rest now. Let curiosity carry you, because the red planet has so much more to say. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on a beach, not on Earth, somewhere older, somewhere that forgot what oceans sound like. The sand beneath your feet is red, but it's wet. The sky above is thick with clouds, and in front of you, stretching to the horizon, is water, not frozen, not vapor, liquid, moving, alive. This isn't fantasy. Scientists suggest this was Mars 3.8 billion years ago, before the silence, before the rust, before it became the cold, distant world we know today. Mars once had seas, and where there is water, there is always the chance of something more. 3.8 billion years. That number is hard to hold in your mind, isn't it? To put it in perspective, that's when Earth was still in its infancy. The moon was closer, the days were shorter, only about 18 hours long. Our planet was being bombarded by asteroids, and the continents hadn't even formed yet. And Mars was wet. Research shows that ancient Mars had enough water to cover its entire surface to a depth of around 450 feet. But the water didn't spread evenly. Most of it pooled in the northern lowlands, forming what scientists now call the Northern Ocean. They've named it Oceanus Borealis, the Northern Ocean. A body of water larger than the Arctic Ocean on Earth, possibly covering nearly a third of the Martian surface. Can you imagine that? An entire hemisphere drowned in blue, waves lapping against rocky shores, tides pulled by Mars's two small moons, Phobos and Deimos racing across the sky faster than our moon ever could. It seems as though Mars wasn't always the dry, silent world we see now. It was loud, flowing, restless, But how do we know this? How can scientists look at a desert planet and say, with confidence, that oceans once existed there? The answer is written in the land itself. When NASA's Mars Global Surveyor, and later the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, began mapping the planet in extraordinary detail, they found something remarkable. The northern plains of Mars are smooth, flat. Unusually so. On Earth, when you look at the ocean floor, it's relatively smooth compared to the continents. Mountains have been worn down by water. Sediments have settled. The same thing appears to have happened on Mars. But the evidence goes deeper than that. Scientists discovered ancient shorelines. Not just one, but multiple lines etched into the Martian surface, marking different water levels over time. Like rings inside a bathtub showing where the water used to sit. One of the most compelling examples is a region called Arabia Terra, located along what would have been the boundary between the ocean and the dry highlands. Researchers found terraces benches carved into the rock, exactly the kind of formations that waves create when they crash against a coast for millions of years. And then there are the valleys, vast networks of channels carved by flowing water branching like veins across the surface. Some are small, delicate like streams. Others are massive, wider than the Grand Canyon, carved by catastrophic floods that would dwarf anything Earth has ever seen. Water didn't just exist on Mars, it moved. It shaped the world. Let's talk about one of those valleys for a moment. It's called Casse Valles, and it's one of the largest outflow channels ever discovered. Casse Valles is nearly 2,000 miles long. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the distance from New York to Denver. And in some places, it's over 200 miles wide. Scientists believe it was carved by some of the most violent floods in the history of the solar system. Not rain, not a slow river, but a sudden catastrophic release of water trapped beneath the surface, bursting through the crust and tearing across the landscape at unimaginable speed. How fast research suggests the water may have been moving at speeds of up to 30 million cubic feet per second. That's thousands of times more powerful than the Amazon River, the largest river on Earth. Where did all that water come from? Some scientists think it was locked underground in vast reservoirs of ice and liquid water, pressurized beneath the Martian crust. When volcanic activity or meteor impacts fractured the surface, the water exploded outward, carving these colossal channels in a matter of days or weeks. And then it froze, or evaporated, or sank back into the ground, leaving behind only the memory of its passage etched into stone. But oceans and floods aren't the only evidence. There's something even more subtle, even more telling. Minerals. When NASA's Spirit and Opportunity rovers began exploring Mars in 2004, they weren't just taking pictures. They were analyzing rocks, grinding into them with specialized tools, studying their chemical composition. And they found clays, sulfates, carbonates, hematite. Now, those names might not mean much to you, but to a geologist, they're a biography. Because those minerals only form in the presence of liquid water. Take hematite, for example. It's a type of iron oxide, basically rust, but not the kind of rust that forms in dry air. The kind that forms when iron-rich rocks sit in water for long periods of time, reacting slowly, patiently over thousands or even millions of years. Opportunity discovered hematite concretions, tiny round pellets scientists nicknamed blueberries, scattered across the surface of Meridiani Planum. These blueberries formed in water. They're proof that this region wasn't just briefly wet. It was soaked, submerged, for a very, very long time. And clays are even more specific. They form when water interacts with volcanic rock, under neutral or slightly alkaline conditions. The kind of conditions that on Earth are friendly to life. It seems as though Mars didn't just have water. It had the right kind of water. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Let's go back to Gale Crater, the site we mentioned earlier. Gale Crater is 96 miles wide, formed by a meteor impact billions of years ago. And sitting in the middle of that crater is a mountain, Not a mountain that was pushed up by tectonic forces, but a mountain made of sediment, layer upon layer of mud, sand, and silt that settled at the bottom of a lake over millions of years, then hardened into rock. Scientists call it Mount Sharp. It rises 18,000 feet from the crater floor, taller than any mountain in the continental United States. And Curiosity, NASA's car-sized rover, has been slowly climbing it since 2014. As it climbs, it's reading the layers like pages in a book. Each layer represents a different chapter in Mars's history. At the bottom, clays, evidence of a neutral, life-friendly lake. Higher up, sulfates, evidence that the water became more acidic over time, perhaps as the planet dried out and minerals became more concentrated. And at the very top, dust, dry, silent. The final chapter. Mount Sharp is a timeline, a geological record of how Mars slowly lost its water layer by layer over hundreds of millions of years. But here's the question that keeps scientists awake at night. If Mars had oceans and lakes and rivers, if it had water for so long, why did it stop? The answer, as we touched on earlier, is the magnetic field, or rather the loss of it. Earth has a magnetic field because its core is still molten. Liquid iron churning deep beneath our feet generates a protective bubble that extends thousands of miles into space. That bubble shields us from the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles blasted out by the sun. Without that shield, the solar wind would strip away our atmosphere molecule by molecule. And without an atmosphere, liquid water can't exist. It either freezes or evaporates directly into space. Mars had a magnetic field once. Scientists know this because certain rocks on Mars are magnetized, frozen in time, like little compasses pointing in random directions. That means the field existed when those rocks formed, and then it vanished. Research suggests Mars lost its magnetic field around 4 billion years ago. Why possibly? Because the planet's core cooled too quickly. Mars is smaller than Earth, only about half the diameter. Smaller planets lose heat faster. And when the core solidified, the magnetic dynamo stopped. Once that happened, the solar wind began its slow, relentless work. Over millions of years, it peeled away the Martian atmosphere like layers of skin. The air thinned, the pressure dropped, and water, which needs atmospheric pressure to remain liquid, began to disappear. Some of it evaporated into space. Some of it froze into the soil. Some of it sank deep underground where it remains today waiting. Let me ask you something. Have you ever thought about how fragile atmospheres are? On Earth, we take air for granted. We breathe it without thinking. We assume it will always be there. But an atmosphere isn't a given. It's a balance, a delicate equilibrium between gravity pulling gases down and solar wind trying to blow them away. Earth is lucky. We're big enough to hold on to our air, and our magnetic field gives us an extra layer of protection. Venus. Our other neighbor has a thick atmosphere because it's almost the same size as Earth, but Venus has no magnetic field, and yet it keeps its atmosphere. Why? Because it's closer to the sun and the solar wind, there is actually weaker at the top of its thick clouds. Mars lost the cosmic lottery. Too small, too far, magnetic field gone too soon. And once the atmosphere thinned, everything unraveled. Without air to trap heat, temperatures plummeted. Without pressure, water couldn't stay liquid. The rivers dried up. The lakes froze. The oceans vanished, leaving only faint scars behind. It seems as though Mars didn't die suddenly. It faded, like a song played softer and softer, until finally only silence remains. But here's what amazes me. Even after 4 billion years, even after losing almost everything Mars still remembers, the riverbeds are still there, the deltas, the shorelines, the layers of sediment that once sat at the bottom of a lake, all of it preserved in the cold, dry environment like a museum of the past. On Earth, plate tectonics constantly reshapes the surface. Mountains rise, oceans spread, continents drift. The oldest rocks we have are only about 4 billion years old, and even those are rare. But Mars froze in time. Its surface is ancient, untouched by the forces that erase history on Earth. So, when we look at Mars, we're not just seeing a dead planet. We're seeing a snapshot of what planets look like when they're young. And that means Mars can teach us something profound. It can show us what Earth might have looked like 4 billion years ago, back when life was just beginning here. Some scientists even suggest that life might have started on Mars before it started on Earth. Mars cooled faster, so it would have had liquid water sooner. And if life did begin there, and if a meteor impact launched Martian rocks into space, and if some of those rocks eventually landed on Earth, well, maybe we're all Martians. There's a term for this idea. It's called panspermia, the notion that life doesn't start from scratch on every planet, but instead travels between worlds hitching a ride on meteorites. It sounds like science fiction, but it's not as far-fetched as it seems. We've found Martian meteorites on Earth, over 200 of them so far. We know rocks can travel between planets. And we know that some microbes can survive in the vacuum of space for years, protected inside the stone. So, if Mars had life early on, and if some of that life made it to Earth, then life on Earth might not be entirely Earthling. It might be part Martian. Of course, this is speculation. We have no proof, not yet. But it's a reminder that planets aren't isolated, they're connected, and the story of life might be bigger, stranger, and older than we ever imagined. Think about it for a moment. Everything you know, everything you are, might trace back to a wet, ancient Mars, to a river flowing through a valley that no longer exists, to a shoreline where waves crashed against red rock under a sky we'll never see. And now, billions of years later, we've sent machines back to that world. We're walking its surface again, not with feet but with wheels and cameras and spectrometers. We're reading its history, piecing together the story of what happened when the water disappeared. Mars doesn't speak, but it remembers. And if we listen carefully, we can hear what it's trying to say. So, where does all that water go? That's the question we'll turn to next, because Mars isn't entirely dry, not yet. Deep beneath the surface, locked in ice and hidden in shadows, water still exists. Scientists have found it, they've mapped it. And in some places, they think it might even be liquid. If ancient Mars had oceans, modern Mars has secrets. Frozen rivers beneath the dust. Glaciers buried under rock. Lakes trapped under polar ice waiting in the dark. And wherever there is water, even frozen water, there is the possibility of something more. Something patient. Something that learned long ago how to survive the cold. Let the thought settle softly. Rest in the quiet, because the red planet still has mysteries to share, and we're only beginning to uncover them. Imagine you're walking through a desert. The sun beats down, the ground cracks beneath your feet. There's no rain, no rivers, no lakes, just dust and stone stretching endlessly in every direction. You'd think nothing lives here, nothing could, but then you dig, just a few feet down, and there beneath the baked surface you find it. Ice, cold, ancient, waiting. That's Mars, not a dead world, a sleeping one. And beneath its rust-red skin, water still hides. Frozen, yes, but water nonetheless. And wherever there is water, even trapped in ice, scientists suggest there might still be a chance. A whisper of possibility. A door left slightly open. Let's start with something surprising. Mars has ice caps. You can see them from Earth with a decent telescope. Bright white patches at the north and south poles glowing against the red. But these aren't like Earth's polar ice caps. They're not just frozen water. They're a mix. At the North Pole, the cap is mostly water ice layered with dust. But at the South Pole, the surface is frozen carbon dioxide, dry ice. It snows there, not water, but CO2 falling gently from the thin Martian sky. Underneath that dry ice, though, research shows there's water ice. Lots of it. Scientists estimate the southern polar cap contains enough frozen water to cover the entire planet in a layer about 36 feet deep, if it melted. 36 feet. That's the height of a 3-story building. An ocean's worth of water locked away in ice, waiting in silence. But here's the question. Is it all frozen, or is some of it liquid? In 2018, a team of Italian scientists published something extraordinary in the journal Science. Using radar data from the Mars Express orbiter, they detected something unusual beneath the southern polar ice cap, a bright reflection, the kind of signal that on Earth usually means one thing: liquid water. They found it about a mile beneath the surface in a region called Planum Australe. The radar showed a patch roughly 12 miles wide, sitting beneath layers of ice and dust. The scientists suggested it might be a subglacial lake similar to the ones we find buried under Antarctica. The discovery made headlines. Liquid water on Mars. Not ancient, not long gone, but there, right now. But science doesn't move that quickly. Other researchers began to question the findings. Some suggested the radar reflection could be caused by clays or volcanic rock, or even just layers of ice with different temperatures. The debate continues. As of now, we're not certain, but the possibility remains. And even if that specific lake isn't real, the idea is. Scientists know that under the right conditions, pressure salt, geothermal heat water, can remain liquid even in the freezing cold of Mars. It seems as though Mars might be hiding more than we ever expected. Let's talk about salt for a moment, because salt changes everything. On Earth, pure water freezes at 32 degrees, Fahrenheit 0 degrees Celsius. But if you add salt, the freezing point drops. Seawater, for example, doesn't freeze until about 28 degrees. And if you add even more salt, you can push that temperature down further and further. This matters on Mars because Martian soil is full of salts, not table salt, but perchlorate's highly concentrated salts that can lower the freezing point of water dramatically. Research suggests that in the presence of perchlorates, water might remain liquid at temperatures as low as minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit. And Mars gets cold. Surface temperatures at night can drop to minus 100 degrees or lower. But underground is warmer. The deeper you go, the more insulated you are from the surface cold. And if there's geothermal heat from the planet's interior, even just a little, that warmth can create pockets where ice melts into brine, salty liquid water. NASA's Phoenix lander, which landed near the Martian North Pole in 2008, found evidence of this. It dug into the soil and discovered not just ice, but what scientists called liquid interfacial water. Tiny films of liquid water clinging to soil particles kept from freezing by the salts mixed in. It's not a lake, it's not even a puddle, but it's liquid. And on Mars, that's everything. Now, let's travel to the other side of the planet, to a place called Utopia Planitia, a vast plain in the northern hemisphere. In 2016, scientists using ground-penetrating radar from the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter discovered something remarkable. Beneath the surface of Utopia Planitia, they found a deposit of buried ice larger than the state of New Mexico. This isn't surface frost. It's a massive ancient glacier covered by a thin layer of dirt and rock hidden from view. Scientists estimate it contains as much water as Lake Superior, one of the largest freshwater lakes on Earth. How did it get there? Research suggests it formed during a different era of Martian climate, a time when the planet's axial tilt was different and ice accumulated in the mid-latitudes instead of just at the poles. Over time, dust storms buried it, preserving it like a time capsule. And it's not alone. Scientists have found similar deposits across Mars, hidden under plains and craters, waiting just beneath the dust. Why does this matter? Because if humans ever go to Mars, they'll need water. Not just to drink, but to make oxygen to grow food, to create fuel for the journey home. And hauling water from Earth is expensive. Every pound of cargo costs thousands of dollars to launch. But if water is already there buried and waiting, that changes everything. Mars isn't a desert we have to bring supplies to. It's a place where the supplies are already buried. We just have to dig. Let me tell you about a place on Earth. It's called Lake Vostok, and it sits beneath the ice of Antarctica, buried under more than 2 miles of solid ice. For millions of years, Lake Vostok has been cut off from the rest of the world. No sunlight reaches it, no air. The pressure is immense. The temperature hovers just above freezing, kept from solidifying by the weight of the ice pressing down and a tiny bit of geothermal heat rising from below. And yet, when scientists drilled into it in 2012, they found life, bacteria, microbes that had been living in total darkness and isolation for perhaps 15 million years. They survived. Not by photosynthesis, there's no light, but by chemosynthesis, pulling energy from minerals dissolved in the water from the chemical reactions happening in the rock beneath the lake. This discovery changed how scientists think about life. Because if microbes can survive in Lake Vostok, then maybe they could survive in similar environments on other worlds, like beneath the ice on Mars. Scientists call these kinds of places analog environments. They're places on Earth that resemble conditions we might find elsewhere in the solar system. And they're teaching us that life doesn't need what we thought it needed. It doesn't need sunlight. It doesn't need oxygen. It doesn't even need warmth, not really. It just needs water, a source of energy and time. Mars has water frozen, yes, but water. It has minerals in the soil that could provide chemical energy. And it has had billions of years for chemistry to do its slow, patient work. So when scientists talk about searching for life on Mars, they're not imagining forests or animals or anything we'd recognize. They're imagining microbes, tiny, ancient, hidden things, organisms that learn to live in the cracks in the ice and the deep silence of the Martian underground. Do they exist? We don't know, but the conditions are right, and that's enough to keep looking. Here's something that surprised me when I first learned it. Mars has gullies, channels carved into crater walls and steep slopes branching downward like veins. At first glance, they look like they were formed by flowing water, and some scientists believe they were. But here's the mystery: the gullies look fresh, sharp, as if they were carved recently, not billions of years ago. How recently some appear to have formed within the last few decades. NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter has been watching certain gullies since 2006, and it's captured images of them changing, new channels appearing, sediment flowing. Something is carving these features even now. But here's the puzzle. The surface of Mars is too cold for liquid water to exist for more than a few seconds. It would freeze or evaporate almost instantly in the thin atmosphere. So, what's happening? Some scientists suggest it's not pure water, but brine, salty water with a much lower freezing point, seeping out from underground reservoirs during warmer seasons. Others think it might not be water at all, but dry ice, frozen CO2 sublimating directly from solid to gas and causing landslides. The debate continues, but the gullies remain fresh, active, mysterious. A reminder that Mars is not as frozen, not as still as it seems. Let me ask you this. Have you ever thought about how fragile the line is between frozen and flowing water? Is strange. It's one of the only substances that expands when it freezes. That's why ice floats. That's why pipes burst in winter. And it's also why ice under pressure can melt. On Earth, glaciers flow, slowly, imperceptibly, but they move. The weight of the ice above presses down, creating pressure at the bottom. And that pressure can melt the ice just enough to create a thin layer of liquid water. The glacier slides on that water inch by inch, year by year. Could the same thing happen on Mars? Could buried glaciers pressed by the weight of dirt and rock create thin films of liquid water at their base? Some scientists think so. And if that's true, then Mars might have underground rivers, not flowing freely, but seeping through cracks in the ice, hidden from view, carrying dissolved minerals, perhaps even carrying life. It seems as though Mars is not a frozen tomb. It's a world of hidden motion, of slow transformations happening just out of sight. There's a concept in astrobiology called the habitable zone. It's the region around a star where conditions are just right for liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. Not too hot, not too cold. Earth is in the habitable zone. Venus is too close to the sun. Mars is on the outer edge. But here's the thing. The habitable zone only applies to surface water. It doesn't account for what's underground. If you go deep enough into any planet, the temperature rises. On Earth, it increases by about 25 degrees Celsius for every kilometer you descend. Mars's interior is cooler, but the principle is the same. Dig deep enough, and you'll find warmth. That means there might be a deep habitable zone on Mars, a layer beneath the surface where temperatures are stable, where ice melts into liquid water, where microbes could survive, shielded from the radiation and cold of the surface. And the beauty of it is, we don't need to guess. We can look. Rovers can drill. Radar can scan. Orbiters can map the ice. The search for water on Mars isn't about nostalgia. It's not just about understanding the past. It's about finding out if right now beneath our feet or beneath the wheels of our robots there is water. Liquid. Waiting. There's one more place we need to talk about. A place that fascinates scientists more than almost anywhere else on Mars. It's called recurring slope lineae. RSL for short. They're dark streaks that appear on steep slopes during warm season then fade when it gets cold. They were first discovered in 2011 and they've been spotted in multiple locations across Mars. When scientists first saw them, they thought liquid water. The streaks looked exactly like the kind of thing you'd see if briny water was seeping out of the ground, flowing downhill, then evaporating or freezing. But the data has been inconclusive. Some studies detected hydrated salts in the streaks, which would support the water hypothesis. But other studies found no strong evidence of water at all. As of now, we don't know for certain what causes RSL, but the possibility remains. And even if it's not flowing water, it's something dynamic, something active, something that reminds us Mars is still changing, still breathing in its own slow way. Take a quiet breath. Let the cold of Mars settle into your imagination. Because water is more than just a molecule. It's memory. It's potential. It's the difference between a dead rock and a world that might, against all odds, still whisper the word life. We've traced the rivers of Mars's past. We've found the ice of its present. But the story doesn't end there, because water is only part of the equation. Life, if it exists, needs more than H2O. It needs chemistry, carbon, methane, energy. And Mars has those things too. Not in abundance, not obviously, but they're there hidden in the soil, drifting in the atmosphere, released in quiet bursts that scientists are only beginning to understand. So, let your mind drift a little deeper. Let curiosity pull you forward, because the next part of this journey takes us into the chemistry of life itself, into the molecules that might even now be stirring beneath the red dust, waiting to be found. There's a gas drifting through the Martian atmosphere right now, invisible, odorless, and utterly mysterious. It appears in tiny bursts rising from the ground in certain seasons, then vanishing just as quickly. Scientists have been tracking it for years, and they still can't agree on where it comes from. It's called methane, and on Earth most methane comes from life. Bacteria in swamps, cows digesting grass, microbes deep in the ocean floor eating hydrogen and exhaling methane into the dark. So when we find methane on Mars, the question becomes unavoidable. Is something down there, breathing? Let's begin with the basics. What is methane really? Chemically, it's simple. One carbon atom bonded to 4 hydrogen atoms, CH4, the simplest hydrocarbon, the building block of natural gas, the fuel we burn to heat our homes. But methane is also a biosignature. That means it's a molecule that in many cases points to the presence of life. On Earth, the vast majority of methane is produced biologically. Microorganisms called methanogens live in environments with no oxygen swamps, rice paddies, the guts of animals, deep ocean sediments. They consume hydrogen and carbon dioxide, and they produce methane as a waste product. It's a form of metabolism, a way of extracting energy from molecules when oxygen isn't available, and it's ancient. Some scientists believe methanogens were among the earliest forms of life on Earth, thriving billions of years ago in the oxygen-free atmosphere of our young planet. So, when NASA's Curiosity rover detected methane in the Martian atmosphere in 2013, it wasn't just interesting, it was profound. Because if Mars has methane, and if that methane is biological, then Mars has life. But science doesn't move that fast. First, we have to ask, could the methane come from something else? The answer, frustratingly, is yes. Methane can form without life, geologically, through a process called serpentinization. Here's how it works. When certain types of rock, specifically rocks rich in iron and magnesium, like olivine, react with water, a chemical transformation occurs. The rock breaks down, releasing hydrogen. That hydrogen can then react with carbon dioxide dissolved in the water, producing methane. No life required, just rock water heat and time. On Earth, serpentinization happens in hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor. It's one of the reasons scientists are so interested in places like Enceladus, Saturn's icy moon, which has geysers shooting water into space. That water contains methane, and it might come from serpentinization happening beneath the moon's frozen crust. Mars could have the same process. We know Mars has olivine-rich rocks. We know it once had abundant water. And we know there might still be liquid water underground, reacting with minerals releasing methane that seeps up through cracks and escapes into the atmosphere. So the methane could be geological, or it could be biological, or it could be both. And that's the mystery. Let's talk about what Curiosity actually found. Because the data is strange. Really strange. Curiosity landed in Gale Crater in 2012. One of its instruments, called the Tunable Laser Spectrometer, is designed to sniff the air, to measure gases in the Martian atmosphere with incredible precision. And what it found was this: most of the time, methane levels are extremely low, background levels of about 0.4 parts per billion, barely detectable. But every so often the levels spike. Suddenly, for a few weeks, the methane concentration jumps to 7 parts per billion, 10 times higher. Then it drops back down as if someone turned off a faucet. Research shows these spikes happen seasonally, often in late summer in the northern hemisphere. But they don't happen every year. Sometimes they appear, sometimes they don't. And no one knows why. Even more puzzling, when the European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter began studying Mars's atmosphere in 2018, it found almost no methane at all. Its instruments are even more sensitive than Curiosity's, and yet it detected nothing. How can one instrument on the surface find methane, while another in orbit finds none? Scientists suggest the methane might be released in localized bursts close to the ground, and then destroyed or dispersed before it reaches higher altitudes. But that raises another question: what's destroying it? It seems as though Mars is playing a game with us, showing just enough to make us wonder, but not enough to be certain. Here's where it gets even stranger. Methane on Mars shouldn't last long, not according to the chemistry we understand. In Earth's atmosphere, methane sticks around for about a decade before it breaks down. Sunlight, oxygen, and other reactive molecules gradually destroy it. But on Mars, with its thin atmosphere and intense ultraviolet radiation, scientists calculated that methane should only survive for a few hundred years, maybe less. So, if Curiosity is detecting methane now, that means it's being released now, recently, perhaps even continuously. Something on Mars is producing methane, not something that happened billions of years ago, something happening today. And that's what makes this so tantalizing. Because whether it's life or geology, Mars is active. It's not a dead rock. It's a world where chemistry is still happening, where gases are still seeping out, where the story isn't over. Let me tell you about a place on Earth where methane and life are deeply intertwined. It's called the Lost City Hydrothermal Field, and it sits on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, about 2,500 feet below the surface. Lost City isn't like other hydrothermal vents. There's no volcanic heat. Instead, the energy comes from serpentinization, the same process we talked about earlier. Water reacts with olivine-rich rock, producing hydrogen and methane, and the vents release fluids that are warm, alkaline, and full of chemical energy. And life thrives there. Not complex life, but microbes, methanogens, bacteria that feed on hydrogen and exhale methane. They don't need sunlight, they don't need oxygen, they just need the chemistry provided by the rock and the water. Scientists believe Lost City might resemble the environments where life first began on Earth. Not in a lightning-struck tide pool, but in the dark and the deep, where chemical reactions provided the energy needed for the first cells to form. And if life can begin in a place like Lost City, then maybe it could begin in a place like ancient Mars, or even modern Mars, hidden underground, where water and rock still meet in the dark. But here's the challenge. How do you tell the difference between biological methane and geological methane? On Earth, scientists use something called isotopic analysis. Methane molecules are mostly made of carbon-12, the most common form of carbon, but a small percentage contain carbon-13, a heavier isotope. Life prefers carbon-12. It's lighter, easier to use. So, biological methane tends to have a higher ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13. Geological methane, on the other hand, doesn't show that preference. The ratio is more balanced. If we could measure the isotopic composition of Martian methane, we could get a clue. But so far we haven't been able to. The concentrations are too low, the instruments aren't sensitive enough, and the methane disappears before we can study it in detail. So for now, the question remains open, and that's okay. Science doesn't always give us answers immediately. Sometimes it just gives us better questions. Let's talk about carbon for a moment, because life as we know it is built from carbon. Why carbon? Because carbon is versatile. It forms strong bonds with itself and with other elements. Hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. It can create chains, rings, complex structures. It's the backbone of DNA, proteins, fats, sugars. Every living thing on Earth is a cathedral of carbon molecules. And Mars has carbon, lots of it, locked in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, dissolved in ancient rocks, bound up in carbonates formed when CO2 reacted with water billions of years ago. Curiosity has even detected organic molecules on Mars. Not life, but the building blocks of life. Complex carbon compounds found in drilled rock samples from Gale Crater. Now, organic doesn't mean biological. Organic just means carbon-based. Meteorites carry organic molecules. Comets are full of them. Carbon chemistry happens all over the universe, with or without life. But finding organic molecules on Mars tells us something important. The raw materials are there. The chemistry that could, under the right conditions, lead to life. It seems as though Mars has all the ingredients: water, carbon, energy. The question is whether those ingredients ever came together in just the right way. Have you ever thought about how unlikely life is, and yet how inevitable it seems? On Earth, life appeared remarkably quickly. The planet formed 4.5 billion years ago. It was bombarded by asteroids for hundreds of millions of years. The surface was molten, hostile, chaotic. But by 3.8 billion years ago, maybe even earlier, life was already here. Microbes, simple single-celled, but unmistakably alive. That suggests life doesn't need perfect conditions. It doesn't need a paradise. It just needs a chance, a pocket of stability, a little water, a little chemistry, a little time. Mars had those things for a long time, longer than it took for life to start on Earth. So, why wouldn't life have started there too? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But the possibility is real, and the only way to know for sure is to keep looking. There's a common mistake people make when they think about life on other worlds. They imagine it will look like us, green, growing, moving, breathing air. But life on Mars, if it exists, wouldn't look like that. It would be microbial, invisible to the naked eye, hidden in cracks in the rock and films of water, on soil particles and caverns deep underground, where the temperature is just above freezing, and the pressure is just high enough for liquid to exist. It wouldn't build cities, it wouldn't send signals, it wouldn't even know we were looking for it. And that's the beauty of it. That's the humility it teaches us. Because life doesn't have to be grand to be profound. A single bacterium thriving in the Martian soil would be one of the most important discoveries in human history. It would mean we're not alone. It would mean life isn't unique to Earth. It would mean the universe is full of possibility. Let's return to the methane for a moment, because there's one more thing we need to consider. If the methane on Mars is biological, that raises a question. Where are the organisms producing it? On Earth, methanogens live in environments with no oxygen, swamps, deep ocean sediments, the guts of termites. They're anaerobic, meaning they can't survive in the presence of oxygen. Mars's atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide, with only trace amounts of oxygen. The surface is essentially anaerobic, so if methanogens exist on Mars, they could in theory survive near the surface. But the surface is harsh. Freezing temperatures, intense radiation, no protection from the sun's ultraviolet light. So, scientists believe that if life exists on Mars, it's underground. Meters, maybe kilometers beneath the surface where conditions are stable, where ice melts into brine, where methane produced by microbes can seep upward through fractures in the rock and eventually escape into the atmosphere. Research suggests that we might be detecting the breath of an entire hidden biosphere, a world beneath the world, silent, patient, waiting. Think about that for a moment. Imagine drilling down into the Martian soil, through the dust, through the rock, deeper and deeper, until you reach a layer where the temperature rises just enough for water to be liquid. And there in the dark, in a crack, no wider than a hair, you find a film of water, salty, cold, barely liquid. And in that water, under a microscope, you see a cell. Tiny, simple, moving ever so slightly, alive. What would that mean? Not just for science, but for us, for how we see ourselves in the universe. It would mean life is not a miracle. It's a pattern, a process that happens wherever the conditions are right. And that means it's probably happening elsewhere too, on the moons of Jupiter, in the oceans of Enceladus, on planets orbiting distant stars. It seems as though we are not the exception. We are the rule. But let's be careful. Let's not assume too much, because the methane on Mars might not be biological at all. It might be serpentinization, or some other geological process we haven't thought of yet. And that's okay, because even if the methane is geological, it's still fascinating. It means Mars is chemically active. It means reactions are happening underground, producing gases shaping the planet's chemistry. And where there's chemistry, especially chemistry involving water and carbon, there's the potential for biology. So, whether the methane is life or not, it's pointing us in the right direction. It's telling us, look here, dig here, pay attention. Mars is speaking, in methane and minerals and organic molecules. And slowly, carefully, we're learning its language. There's one more piece of this puzzle I want to share with you. A discovery that, when I first read about it, gave me chills. In 2014, Curiosity detected a massive spike in methane. Over the course of just a few weeks, the concentration jumped to nearly 10 parts per billion, 20 times the background level. Then it disappeared, completely, as if it had never been there. Scientists don't know what caused it. A sudden release from underground, a meteorite impact, disturbing frozen deposits, something seasonal or something active. The data doesn't tell us, but it does tell us this. Mars is not static, it's dynamic. It's releasing gases, changing, responding to forces we are only beginning to understand. And that's enough to keep us searching. So let your mind rest in the mystery, because the chemistry of Mars is not a closed book. It's a conversation between rock and water, between carbon and hydrogen, between the planet and the universe, and maybe between life and the void. We've traced the water, we've found the methane, but life needs more than molecules. It needs a place to live, a substrate, soil, ground. And Martian soil is strange. It's not like Earth's dirt. It's not rich with organic matter or teeming with bacteria. It's red, salty, and in some places poisonous, But even poison scientists suggest can be food for the right kind of life, and the soil of Mars holds secrets of its own, chemistry that might support life, or might have once when the world was wetter and warmer. Let that thought settle, breathe softly, and drift with me into the next part of the story, because we're going deeper now, into the dust, into the minerals, into the very ground that might even now be holding life in its quiet grip. Pick up a handful of Earth's soil, any soil, from a garden, a forest, a field. Hold it close. What do you smell? Richness, decay, life breaking down into life again. That earthy scent comes from a molecule called geosmin, produced by bacteria as they consume dead organic matter. Earth's soil is alive, teeming with microbes, fungi, insects, roots. A single teaspoon can contain more organisms than there are people on the planet. Now, imagine Martian soil, red, dry, cold. And when we finally analyzed it up close, we found something no one expected, not life, but poison. The kind of chemical that on Earth we use to make rocket fuel and explosives. And yet, some organisms here have learned to eat it. So, the question becomes, is Martian soil hostile to life, or is it just waiting for the right kind of survivor? Let's start with the color, that unmistakable red, the rust that covers nearly every inch of the Martian surface. It's iron oxide, specifically a form called hematite mixed with dust particles so fine they hang in the atmosphere during storms, turning the sky a pale, dusty pink. Iron rusts when it reacts with oxygen and water. On Earth, that happens constantly. Metal left outside corrodes. Cars rust in the rain. It's the slow marriage of iron and air. But Mars has almost no oxygen in its atmosphere. So, how did all that iron rust scientists believe it happened billions of years ago, when Mars still had water and a thicker atmosphere? The water reacted with iron-rich volcanic rock, oxidizing it over millions of years. And when the water disappeared, the rust remained a permanent stain covering the planet. It seems as though Mars wears its history on its surface. Every grain of red dust is a memory of the water that once flowed there. But iron oxide is just the beginning. When NASA's Phoenix lander touched down near the Martian North Pole in 2008, it did something no mission had done before. It tasted the soil. Phoenix had a wet chemistry lab on board. It scooped up samples, mixed them with water, and analyzed the resulting solution. And what it found was shocking. Perchlorates. Lots of them. At concentrations of about 0.5% by weight. Now, perchlorate is a compound made of chlorine and oxygen ClO4. On Earth, it's rare in nature. We manufacture it for rocket propellant fireworks and explosives. It's also highly toxic to humans. It interferes with the thyroid gland, disrupting hormone production. Finding it on Mars wasn't just surprising, it was a problem. Because if future astronauts want to grow food in Martian soil, perchlorates would poison the plants. And if they want to extract water from the soil, they'd have to remove the perchlorates first. But here's the twist. Perchlorates aren't poison to everything. Research shows that certain bacteria on Earth can actually eat perchlorates. They use them as a source of oxygen, breaking down the molecule and releasing energy in the process. One of these bacteria is called Dichloromonas. It lives in places like California's Mojave Desert and Chile's Atacama Desert, some of the driest places on Earth. And it thrives in soil with high perchlorate concentrations. If bacteria like Dichloromonas can live in Earth's deserts, could something similar survive on Mars? Let's talk about the Atacama Desert for a moment, because it's the closest thing we have to Mars on Earth. The Atacama stretches along the coast of northern Chile, wedged between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes Mountains. It's the driest non-polar desert on the planet. Some weather stations there have never recorded rain, not in decades, not in a century. The soil is ancient, undisturbed, sterile-looking. The landscape is rocky, barren, swept by winds that carry salt from the ocean. And yet, life is there. Scientists have found bacteria living in the soil, surviving on almost nothing. They don't photosynthesize, there's barely any organic matter to feed on. Instead, they pull energy from minerals. They metabolize sulfates, nitrates, and yes, perchlorates. When researchers studied Atacama soil under a microscope, they found microbial communities so sparse, so slow-growing, that they were almost invisible. These organisms don't bloom. They don't reproduce quickly. They just persist. NASA studies the Atacama specifically because it resembles Mars, dry, salty, exposed to intense UV radiation. If life can survive, then maybe it could survive on Mars too. It seems as though life doesn't need abundance. It just needs patience. Now, perchlorates aren't the only salts in Martian soil. There are sulfates, chlorides, nitrates, a whole cocktail of minerals dissolved in the ancient water, then left behind when the water evaporated. Salts do something important. They lower the freezing point of water, allowing it to remain liquid at temperatures far below zero. On Earth, we use this principle all the time. We salt icy roads in winter. We add salt to ice cream makers to drop the temperature. In the ocean, seawater doesn't freeze until about 28 degrees Fahrenheit because of the dissolved salts. On Mars, where nighttime temperatures can plunge to minus 100 degrees salts, might be the only reason liquid water can exist at all. Research shows that brine salty water solutions could be stable on Mars in certain locations and certain seasons. Not pure water, but something halfway between liquid and ice. Thick, syrupy, saturated with minerals. And if brines exist even in thin films clinging to soil particles, they could support microbial life. Because on Earth we've found bacteria living in brine pools so salty, so harsh, that nothing else can survive there. And they're thriving. Let me tell you about a place called Don Juan Pond. It's in Antarctica in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, one of the coldest, driest places on Earth. Don Juan Pond is only a few inches deep and about the size of a small parking lot. But it never freezes, not even in the middle of Antarctic winter when temperatures drop to minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Why? Because it's the saltiest body of water on Earth. Its salt concentration is over 40%, far saltier than the Dead Sea. It's so salty that its freezing point is around minus 60 degrees. And remarkably, scientists have found microbes living in Don Juan Pond. Not many, not thriving, but alive. Adapted to conditions that would kill almost anything else. If microbes can survive in Don Juan Pond, then maybe they could survive in Martian brines. The lesson is clear. Life doesn't ask for comfort. It adapts. It finds a way. But here's where things get complicated. Perchlorates don't just lower the freezing point of water. They also absorb water from the atmosphere. This process is called deliquescence. Certain salts, when exposed to even tiny amounts of humidity, can pull water vapor out of the air and dissolve themselves, forming a liquid solution. On Mars, the atmosphere is incredibly dry, but it's not completely dry. There's a small amount of water vapor, especially near the poles and during certain seasons. Scientists believe that at night, when temperatures drop and humidity rises slightly, perchlorate salts in the Martian soil might absorb water vapor and become liquid brines. Then during the day when the sun rises and temperatures increase, the brines evaporate again. It's a cycle. Liquid at night, dry during the day, over and over. And if that's happening, it means Mars has transient liquid water. Not flowing rivers, not lakes, but thin films, microscopic pockets. Enough perhaps for microbes. It seems as though Mars breathes in water at night and exhales it during the day, a slow, quiet rhythm that might sustain life hidden in the soil. Now, let's talk about another aspect of Martian soil, its texture, its structure. When rovers dig into the Martian surface, they find dust, not like the dust on your shelf at home. Martian dust is incredibly fine. The particles are only a few microns across, smaller than the width of a human hair. This dust gets everywhere. It coats solar panels, reducing their efficiency. It sticks to instruments. During dust storms, it fills the entire atmosphere, blocking out the sun for weeks at a time. But why is it so fine? On Earth, dust particles are usually broken down by water, wind, and biological activity. Glaciers grind rocks into silt. Rivers smooth pebbles. Plants break apart stone with their roots. Mars doesn't have those processes anymore. Instead, the dust is formed by impacts meteorites smashing into the surface, shattering rock into tiny fragments, and by the constant freeze-thaw cycles that crack stones apart over millions of years. Research suggests that Martian soil is also jagged angular, unlike the rounded grains we find on Earth. That's because there's been no water to smooth the edges, no tumbling in rivers to polish them, and that matters for life. Because sharp angular particles create tiny spaces, nooks and crannies where water can collect, where microbes could hide from radiation and temperature extremes. Martian soil might look barren, but it's full of hiding places. Here's something fascinating. When Curiosity drilled into rocks in Gale Crater, it found that the soil contained not just salts and iron, but also clay minerals. Clays form when water interacts with volcanic rock under relatively mild conditions. The kind of conditions that on Earth are associated with habitable environments. But more than that, clays have a special property. They can protect organic molecules from radiation and oxidation. They act like tiny shields preserving carbon-based compounds that would otherwise break down. This matters because Mars's surface is bombarded by cosmic rays and ultraviolet light. Without a thick atmosphere or magnetic field to block that radiation, organic molecules don't survive long on the surface. But if they're buried in clay, sealed away from the harsh environment, they can last for billions of years. Scientists suggest that if life ever existed on Mars, the best place to look for its remains would be in ancient clay deposits. Places where water once pooled, where sediments settled, where time sealed away the evidence like a geological tomb. Let me ask you this. Have you ever thought about what soil really is? It's not just broken rock, it's a history. Every mineral, every grain tells a story about the environment that formed it. On Earth, soil is a living system. Fungi break down dead leaves, bacteria fix nitrogen from the air, worms tunnel through aerating the ground, plants grow, die, and return their nutrients to the Earth. But Martian soil. It's a record of a world that changed. Volcanic rock weathered by ancient water, salts left behind when lakes evaporated, dust carried by winds for eons. It's not alive, but it remembers. And that memory tells us something crucial. It tells us that Mars was once habitable, that the chemistry of life, the elements, the energy, the environment existed there. Whether life actually arose is another question, but the potential was there, and maybe in some hidden corner, it still is. There's a place on Earth that NASA has studied extensively as a Mars analog. It's called Rio Tinto, and it's a river in southwestern Spain. Rio Tinto is famous for its color. The water runs red-stained by iron oxides just like the soil of Mars. The river is highly acidic, with a pH of about 2 acidic enough to dissolve metal, and yet life thrives there. Bacteria, algae, even fungi. They've adapted to the extreme acidity, to the high concentrations of heavy metals, to conditions that would kill most other organisms. When scientists study the microbes in Rio Tinto, they're not just studying Earth, they're studying the kind of life that might exist on Mars. Because if microbes can survive in Rio Tinto's toxic acidic water, then maybe they could survive in Martian brines, in perchlorate-laden soil, in environments we'd consider uninhabitable. It seems as though life defines habitable for itself. It doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It makes do with what's there. But here's the hard truth. Martian soil as we understand it now is hostile to life as we know it. The perchlorates would poison most organisms. The cold would freeze them. The radiation would shred their DNA. The lack of organic matter would starve them. And yet, most organisms is not the same as all organisms. On Earth, we keep discovering life in places we thought were sterile, in boiling hot springs, in frozen Antarctic lakes, in rocks miles underground where organisms survive by eating minerals and have been isolated for millions of years. These are called extremophiles, organisms that love extreme conditions, and they're teaching us that life's boundaries are far wider than we ever imagined. So, when we say Martian soil is hostile, what we really mean is it's hostile to us, to the soft, fragile, oxygen-breathing creatures we are, but to a bacterium that eats perchlorates, that thrives in freezing brine, that repairs its DNA faster than radiation can damage it. Martian soil might be home. There's one more thing we need to consider: the dust storms. Mars is famous for them. Some are small, localized. Others are global, wrapping the entire planet in a veil of dust for months. In 2018, a global dust storm ended the Opportunity rover's mission. The storm was so thick, so dense, that Opportunity solar panels couldn't generate power. The rover went silent, and it never woke up. But dust storms aren't just destructive, they're also distributive. When dust lifts into the atmosphere, it carries with it everything on the surface: salts, minerals, and potentially microbes. If life exists on Mars, dust storms might be its transportation system, carrying organisms from one location to another, spreading them across the planet, allowing them to colonize new environments. Research suggests that some Earth bacteria can survive being carried by winds for hundreds of miles, even across oceans. If Martian microbes are equally hardy, they could hitchhike on dust storms, moving from crater to crater, from pole to equator, searching for the next habitable pocket. It seems as though even the harshest conditions might serve a purpose. Wind dust, cold not obstacles, but tools. So, take a breath. Let the dust settle in your mind. Because Martian soil is not just dirt, it's a puzzle. A chemical landscape full of clues about what Mars was and what it might still be. We've analyzed the minerals, we've measured the salts, we've studied the texture, the chemistry, the way water might cling to particles in the cold Martian night. But soil is only part of the story, because life, if it exists, needs more than minerals and moisture. It needs resilience, the ability to endure, to survive conditions that would destroy almost anything else. And that's what we'll explore now. The microbes of Earth that live in impossible places. The extremophiles that thrive where nothing should. The organisms that prove life doesn't need comfort, only stubbornness. Because if they can survive on Earth's harshest landscapes, then perhaps something like them could survive on Mars. Breathe softly. Let curiosity carry you forward. The story of survival is just beginning. There's a creature so small you'd need a microscope to see it. And yet it can survive being frozen solid for decades, boiled alive, blasted with radiation 1,000 times stronger than what would kill you, shot into the vacuum of space, and when conditions improve, it simply wakes up and continues living. It's called a tardigrade, a water bear, and it's rewriting everything we thought we knew about the limits of life. If something that tiny, that soft, can survive conditions more extreme than anything on Mars, then maybe Mars isn't as lifeless as it looks. Maybe survival isn't about being strong. Maybe it's about being stubborn. And stubbornness, it turns out, is one of life's greatest talents. Let's begin with a question. What does life actually need? For most of human history, we assumed the answer was simple: warmth, sunlight, oxygen, water, comfortable temperatures, the kind of conditions we find pleasant. But the more we explore Earth, the more we realize how wrong we were. Life exists in boiling hot springs, where the water is acidic enough to dissolve metal. It exists in frozen lakes buried under miles of Antarctic ice. It exists in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, where no light has ever reached. It exists in solid rock miles beneath the surface, where organisms have been isolated for millions of years, living off the energy from radioactive decay in the stone itself. These places aren't hospitable, they're hostile. And yet life doesn't just survive there, it thrives. Scientists call these organisms extremophiles, lovers of extremes, and they're teaching us that life's boundaries are far, far wider than we ever imagined. It seems as though life doesn't ask for paradise. It just asks for possibility. Let's talk about heat first, because some organisms don't just tolerate heat, they require it. In 1967, scientists discovered bacteria living in the hot springs of Yellowstone National Park. The water temperature was 160 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn your skin instantly. And yet inside that scalding water, microbes were thriving. They named one of these bacteria Thermus aquaticus, and it wasn't just surviving the heat, it needed the heat. Below a certain temperature, it couldn't function. Since then, we found even more extreme examples. In hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where water superheated by volcanic activity reaches temperatures of 250 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, bacteria, called hyperthermophiles, live comfortably. One species, Methanopyrus candleri, holds the record. It can survive at 252 degrees Fahrenheit. At normal atmospheric pressure, water boils at 212 degrees. But deep in the ocean, pressure keeps the water liquid even at these extreme temperatures. And these microbes thrive there. Why does this matter for Mars? Because Mars has geothermal heat too. Not everywhere, but in certain locations near ancient volcanic regions, perhaps deep underground, where the planet's interior still radiates warmth. If life can exist at 250 degrees on Earth, it could exist in the warm pockets of Mars. Now, let's go to the opposite extreme, cold. Deep, bone-chilling cold. Antarctica is one of the harshest environments on Earth. Winter temperatures can drop to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is dry, the wind is relentless. It's a frozen desert, and yet microbes live there, in the ice, in the rocks, even in the thin films of water that form between ice crystals when the sun briefly warms the surface. One of the most fascinating examples is a bacterium called Psychrobacter. It's a psychrophile, meaning it loves the cold. It can remain active at temperatures as low as 5 degrees Fahrenheit. But it gets stranger. Some bacteria don't just survive freezing, they enter a state called cryptobiosis, a kind of suspended animation. Their metabolism slows to almost nothing. They're not quite alive, not quite dead, just waiting. In 2007, scientists revived bacteria that had been frozen in Siberian permafrost for 500,000 years. They thawed the sample, and the bacteria started reproducing again, as if no time had passed. Research shows that life can wait. It can pause. And when conditions improve, it can return. Mars freezes every night. Surface temperatures drop to minus 100 degrees or lower. But if microbes on Earth can survive being frozen for 500,000 years, then Martian microbes, if they exist, could survive the nightly freeze and wake up again when the sun rises. It seems as though cold isn't death, it's just sleep. But temperature is only one challenge. Let's talk about radiation. Mars has no magnetic field. Its atmosphere is thin. That means cosmic rays and solar radiation bombard the surface constantly. Over time, that radiation would shred DNA, breaking the delicate strands that carry genetic information. For most organisms, this would be fatal, but not all. There's a bacterium called Deinococcus radiodurans. Scientists sometimes call it Conan the bacterium because it's nearly indestructible. It can survive radiation doses 3,000 times stronger than what would kill a human. It can endure extreme dehydration, freezing, vacuum, acid. You can blast it with gamma rays, shatter its DNA into hundreds of fragments, and within hours it will repair itself perfectly and keep going. How does it do? This research shows that Deinococcus has multiple copies of its genome. When radiation damages one copy, it uses the others as templates to rebuild. It also produces antioxidants that protect its cellular machinery from damage. It's a molecular repair machine, a survivor built for the worst conditions imaginable. And here's the key. Deinococcus evolved on Earth. It didn't evolve in space or on Mars. It evolved here in environments that required extreme resilience, perhaps in deserts with high UV exposure or in rocks where natural radiation is concentrated. If Earth can produce organisms like Deinococcus, then why couldn't Mars? Let's talk about water, or rather the lack of it. Most life on Earth needs water. Our cells are mostly water. DNA floats in water. Proteins fold in water. Water is the solvent that makes biochemistry possible. But some organisms have learned to survive without it, for years, even decades. Tardigrades, those tiny water bears we mentioned earlier, are masters of this. When their environment dries out, they enter a state called anhydrobiosis. They lose up to 97% of their body water. Their metabolism stops completely. They curl into a tiny ball called a ton, and they wait. In this state, they can survive for over 30 years. They'd have been revived after being frozen in Antarctic ice, after being exposed to the vacuum of space, after being subjected to pressures 6 times greater than the deepest ocean trench. In 2007, the European Space Agency launched tardigrades into orbit and exposed them to the vacuum of space cosmic radiation and extreme UV light. When they returned to Earth and were rehydrated, many of them survived. Some even reproduced. If tardigrades can survive in space, they could survive on Mars. And they're not alone. Certain bacteria form endospores, hardened shells that protect them from almost everything. Desiccation, heat, cold, radiation, chemical toxins. Endospores have been revived after 250 million years trapped in salt crystals. It seems as though life has learned to pause time itself, to wait patient and quiet until the world becomes livable again. Have you ever thought about what it means to be alive? We usually think of life as movement, growth, eating, breathing. But extremophiles teach us that life can be stillness too. A bacterium frozen in ice for 500,000 years isn't dead, it's dormant. A tardigrade dried into a husk isn't gone. It's waiting. Life in these forms is potential, the possibility of waking up when conditions change. And Mars. Mars is a planet of dormancy. A world that froze dried out fell silent. But dormancy isn't death. If life ever existed on Mars, it might still be there waiting. Not active, not thriving, but persistent. Tucked into cracks in the rock, sealed in ice, wrapped in protective layers, holding on. Scientists suggest that the best place to look for Martian life isn't on the surface, it's beneath it. In the subsurface where conditions are more stable, where ice melts into brine, where radiation can't reach. And if we find life there, it probably won't be moving. It will be sleeping, waiting for a signal, warmth water time to wake up. Let me tell you about a place that changed how we think about life. It's called the Rio Tinto, and we mentioned it briefly before. But there's more to the story. Rio Tinto is acidic. Its pH is around 2, similar to stomach acid. The water is full of dissolved metals, iron, copper, arsenic. It's red like Mars, stained with iron oxides. For centuries, people assumed nothing could live there. It looked sterile, poisonous, dead. But when scientists finally studied it closely, they found thriving ecosystems. Bacteria, fungi, algae, all adapted to the extreme acidity, to the heavy metals, to conditions most organisms couldn't tolerate. And these microbes weren't just surviving, they were shaping the river. The acidity came from their metabolism. They were oxidizing iron and sulfur, producing sulfuric acid as a byproduct. In other words, the river's extreme conditions weren't killing life. They were created by life. That changed everything. Because it meant that extreme environments aren't necessarily sterile. They're just different. And life, given time, can learn to thrive anywhere. Research shows that Rio Tinto's microbes might resemble the kind of life that could have existed on Mars billions of years ago, when acidic lakes dotted the surface. Now, let's talk about pressure. Because some organisms live in places where the weight of the ocean above them would crush a human instantly. The Mariana Trench is the deepest part of Earth's oceans. At its lowest point, the Challenger Deep. The water pressure is over 1,000 times greater than its sea level. It's pitch black, freezing cold. No sunlight has ever reached there, and yet life exists. Fish, amphipods, microbes. They've adapted to the crushing pressure, to the darkness, to the scarcity of food. One microbe, Halomonas, was found living at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. It doesn't just tolerate the pressure, it requires it. Bring it to the surface and it dies. Why does this matter for Mars? Because pressure is one of the reasons liquid water can't exist on the Martian surface. The atmospheric pressure is too low. Water either freezes or evaporates. But underground pressure increases. And where there's enough pressure, water can be liquid even at low temperatures. If Earth has organisms that require extreme pressure, Mars might have organisms adapted to its unique pressure conditions, low at the surface, higher beneath it. It seems as though every extreme environment on Earth has taught us the same lesson. Life adapts. Life persists. Life finds a way. There's one more extremophile I want to tell you about. It's called an endolith, and it lives inside solid rock. Endoliths are microbes that colonize tiny cracks and pores in stone miles beneath the Earth's surface. They don't see sunlight. They don't have access to organic matter. So how do they survive? They eat minerals. They pull energy from chemical reactions in the rock itself. Some use hydrogen produced by the breakdown of water in contact with iron-rich minerals. Others metabolize sulfur or methane seeping up from deeper layers. They grow incredibly slowly. Some endoliths divide only once every 100 years. They're not in a hurry. They're just there, existing, waiting. Scientists have found endoliths in rocks over 2 miles beneath the surface. And some of these microbes have been isolated from the surface world for millions of years, evolving independently, cut off from everything we'd recognize as life. If endoliths can live in Earth's deep rock, they could live in Mars's subsurface too, protected from radiation, sheltered from temperature extremes, feeding on the slow chemistry of stone and water. Research suggests that Mars might have a deep biosphere, a hidden world of microbes living in cracks, sustained by geochemistry invisible from the surface. Think about this for a moment. Every extremophile we've discovered has expanded our understanding of where life can exist. We thought life needed sunlight. Then we found chemosynthetic bacteria thriving in darkness. We thought life needed oxygen. Then we found anaerobic microbes that die in its presence. We thought life needed warmth. Then we found psychrophiles flourishing in ice. We thought life needed protection from radiation. Then we found Deinococcus. Every assumption we made about life's limits has been proven wrong. So when we look at Mars and think, it's too cold, too dry, too irradiated, we need to remember we've thought that before, about Earth. And we were wrong. It seems as though life doesn't follow our rules. It writes its own. But here's the honest truth. We haven't found life on Mars, not yet. Not a single cell, not a fossil, not a definitive biosignature. Maybe it's there, hidden deep underground, waiting to be discovered. Or maybe Mars is, and always has been, sterile. Both possibilities are profound. If we find life, it means the universe is full of it, that wherever conditions allow life emerges, that we're not alone, not unique, not the only spark of biology in the cosmos. But if we don't find life, that's profound too. It means Earth is rare, that life is fragile, that the conditions needed for it to begin are so precise, so unlikely that even a planet like Mars, wet and warm for millions of years, never crossed that threshold. Either answer will change us. So breathe, rest in the unknowing, because the search for life isn't over. It's only beginning. We've studied the soil. We've analyzed the chemistry. We've learned what extremophiles can endure. But the real question isn't whether life could survive on Mars. The question is, how would we find it? What tools do we need? What missions? What techniques? And what happens when metal eyes and human curiosity finally reach beneath the surface into the hidden places? where life, if it exists, waits in silence. That's where we're going now, into the history of exploration, the rovers, the landers, the instruments designed to taste, to see, to listen. Because Mars doesn't speak loudly, it whispers, and we're learning slowly how to hear it. Let the questions settle softly, and drift with me into the next chapter of the search. Imagine being the first to touch another world, not with your hands but with wheels, not with your eyes but with cameras, not with your voice but with radio signals traveling millions of miles through the dark. For over 50 years we've been sending machines to Mars, metal explorers with no heartbeat, no breath, no fear. They land alone in the cold and silence, and they begin to search. Some find answers, some find more questions, and some simply stop their missions, ending in dust and darkness, their last messages drifting across space like whispers we'll never fully understand. This is the story of how we learned to see Mars, not as a distant light in the sky, but as a place, a world, a mystery waiting to be touched. Let's go back to the beginning, to 1976, the year two spacecraft changed everything. They were called Viking 1 and Viking 2. NASA's first successful landers on Mars. And they didn't just take pictures, they ran experiments. They scooped up soil, mixed it with nutrients, and looked for signs of metabolism, signs of life. The results were confusing. One experiment called the labeled release seemed to detect biological activity. When nutrients were added to Martian soil, the soil released carbon dioxide, exactly what you'd expect if microbes were consuming the nutrients and exhaling gas. Scientists were cautiously excited, but then another experiment, the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, found no organic molecules in the soil. None. Not even the kind that come from meteorites or natural chemistry. How could there be metabolism without organic matter? How could life exist without the carbon-based molecules that define it? Research suggests the Viking experiments might have detected chemistry, not biology. Mars's soil contains perchlorates and other reactive compounds that, when moistened, can produce chemical reactions that mimic life. Or maybe the instruments weren't sensitive enough. Maybe organic molecules were there, but in concentrations too low to detect with 1970s technology. We still don't know. The Viking results remain one of the most debated data sets in planetary science, and they taught us an important lesson. Detecting life is harder than it sounds. It seems as though Mars gives answers that raise more questions, and that's exactly what keeps us searching. After Viking, there was silence. For 20 years, no successful missions reached Mars's surface. There were attempts. The Soviet Union tried. Every mission failed. Crashes, lost signals, machines that landed but never woke up. Mars earned a reputation. The Bermuda Triangle of the solar system. The planet that eats spacecraft. But in 1997, NASA tried again. And this time, they succeeded. Mars Pathfinder landed on July 3rd, 1997. And it brought something new. Not just a stationary lander, but a rover. A small six-wheeled explorer called Sojourner. Sojourner was tiny, about the size of a microwave oven. It moved slowly, cautiously, no faster than 2 feet per minute. But it moved, and that changed everything. For the first time, we could explore. We could drive to different rocks, analyze them, compare them. We could choose where to go. Sojourner lasted 83 days. It traveled about 300 feet. It analyzed 16 rocks, and it proved that rovers could work on Mars. The mission was only supposed to last a week, but it kept going day after day until finally the signal stopped. No one knows exactly why. Maybe the lander's battery failed. Maybe a dust storm blocked the solar panels. Maybe Mars just decided it was time. But Sojourner's legacy lived on, because NASA learned. And they built bigger rovers, smarter rovers, rovers that could survive for years. In 2004, 2 new rovers landed on opposite sides of Mars. They were twins, Spirit and Opportunity. and they were built to last 90 days. Spirit lasted over 6 years. Opportunity lasted 15 years. Let me say that again. Opportunity, designed for a 90-day mission, explored Mars for nearly 15 years. It traveled over 28 miles farther than any vehicle has ever driven on another planet. It sent back over 200,000 images. And the discoveries, profound. Opportunity landed in a region called Meridiani Planum, and almost immediately it found something: hematite. The blueberries we talked about earlier, tiny iron-rich spherules that only form in the presence of water. But more than that, Opportunity found layered rocks, sedimentary rocks. The kind that form at the bottom of a lake or a sea where fine particles settle over time, layer by layer, compressing into stone. The rocks had ripple patterns like you'd see in a stream bed. They had cross-bedding structures created by flowing water. They had sulfate salts minerals left behind when water evaporates. Research shows that Meridiani Planum was once soaked, not briefly but for a long time, long enough for thick deposits to form, long enough perhaps for life. Spirit on the other side of the planet found evidence of hydrothermal systems, hot springs, where water heated by volcanic activity interacted with rock. On Earth, hot springs are havens for microbial life. It seems as though everywhere we looked, Mars whispered the same story. Water was here, and where there's water, there's possibility. But rovers don't last forever, and both Spirit and Opportunity met their ends on Mars. Spirit got stuck. In 2009, it drove into a patch of soft soil in a place called Troy. Its wheels dug in deeper and deeper until it couldn't move. Engineers tried everything. Driving backward, rocking, spinning the wheels in different combinations. But Spirit was trapped, and winter was coming. Solar panels need sunlight. And during Martian winter, the sun sits low in the sky, providing less light, less power. Spirit's panels were also covered in dust, reducing efficiency even more. NASA tilted Spirit as much as they could, trying to angle its panels toward the sun. But it wasn't enough. The rover went silent in March 2010. Engineers sent commands for months, hoping it would wake up when spring arrived. It never did. Opportunity lasted much longer. But in 2018, a global dust storm engulfed Mars. The sky darkened, the sun disappeared. Opportunity's solar panels couldn't generate power. The last message it sent was a status report. Engineers later described it poetically, though it wasn't literal, "My battery is low and it's getting dark." NASA sent commands for months. Wake up, respond, but silence. In February 2019, NASA officially declared the mission over. Opportunity was gone, and yet Opportunity is still there, sitting in a place called Perseverance Valley, ironically named, covered in dust, silent, waiting for a sun that will never be bright enough to wake it again. Have you ever thought about what it means to leave something behind on another world? Sojourner Spirit Opportunity, they're not coming home. They'll sit on Mars forever, monuments to curiosity, to the human need to explore, to touch, to understand. Someday, maybe centuries from now, someone might visit them, brush off the dust, see the tracks they left, and remember that once we sent machines to dream for us. It seems as though every rover is both a success and a goodbye. But the story didn't end with Opportunity. In 2012, NASA landed something bigger, something more capable, something designed not just to find evidence of past water, but to search for organic molecules, for the chemistry of life itself. Its name is Curiosity, and it's still working. Curiosity is the size of a small car. It weighs about 2,000 pounds. It has 17 cameras, a robotic arm with a drill, a laser that can vaporize rocks from 20 feet away, analyzing the vapor to determine their composition. And unlike Spirit and Opportunity, Curiosity doesn't rely on solar panels. It has a nuclear power source, a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. Heat from decaying plutonium generates electricity. It's the same technology used in deep space probes like Voyager. That means Curiosity can work through dust storms, through winter, through the long Martian nights. It doesn't need the sun, it just needs time. And it's been exploring Gale Crater since August 2012, climbing Mount Sharp layer by layer, reading the history of Mars written in stone. Curiosity has found organic molecules, complex carbon compounds in rocks over 3 billion years old. It detected methane appearing and disappearing in mysterious cycles. It found ancient lake beds where water sat for millions of years. Research shows that Gale Crater was habitable, not just wet but friendly to life. Neutral pH, low salinity, the kind of environment where, on Earth, microbes thrive. Did life actually exist there? Curiosity can't answer that. Its instruments aren't designed to detect cells or fossils, but it's proven the conditions were right. And that's enough to justify the next step. In February 2021, a new rover landed on Mars. Its name is Perseverance, and its mission is different from anything before. Perseverance isn't just exploring, it's collecting samples. It drills into rocks, extracts cores about the size of a piece of chalk, seals them in titanium tubes, and leaves them on the surface. Someday, another mission will retrieve those tubes and bring them back to Earth. It's called Mars Sample Return, and it's one of the most ambitious missions ever planned. If it succeeds, we'll have Martian rocks in laboratories here on Earth, where we can analyze them with instruments far more sensitive than anything we can send to Mars. We'll be able to search for fossils, for preserved cells, for isotopic signatures that can only come from biology. Perseverance landed in a place called Jezero Crater, and Jezero is special. Scientists believe it was once a lake fed by rivers flowing through a breach in the crater's rim. The delta where those rivers met the lake is still visible layers of sediment deposited over time, now hardened into rock. Deltas are important. On Earth, deltas are rich in organic matter. Rivers carry nutrients-dead plants, microbes. When the water slows at the delta, all that material settles. If life existed on Mars, Jezero's delta is one of the best places to look for its remains. Research shows that Perseverance has already found organic molecules in delta rocks, molecules that could be biological or could be chemical. We won't know until we get the samples home. But the fact that we're asking the question that we're planning missions to bring Mars to us is extraordinary. Perseverance brought something else too, something that made the world pause and listen. A small helicopter, 4 pounds of carbon fiber solar cells, and Ingenuity. Its name is Ingenuity, and on April 19, 2021, it flew, the first powered flight on another planet. Not a glider, not a balloon, a helicopter with spinning rotors lifting off the ground in an atmosphere 100 times thinner than Earth's. It was only supposed to fly 5 times, a technology demonstration, proof that flight is possible on Mars, but it kept flying, again and again. Over 70 flights. It scouted terrain for Perseverance. It explored areas rovers couldn't reach. It pushed the limits of what small, lightweight machines can do. Ingenuity changed how we think about Mars exploration. Because rovers are slow, they travel a few hundred feet a day, carefully avoiding obstacles. But helicopters, they can cover miles in minutes. They can see over hills into craters across valleys. Future missions might carry larger drones, machines that can land, collect samples, and return them to a central rover, or even fly samples directly to a rocket for return to Earth. It seems as though Mars is teaching us how to move in new ways, not just rolling, but flying, not just touching, but soaring. But let's be honest, for all our success, we've also failed, a lot. Over 50 missions have been sent to Mars. Less than half succeeded. Crashes, lost communications, explosions on launch pads, landers that arrived but never turned on. The Soviet Union lost every single Mars mission it attempted. The most famous failure was Mars 3, which landed successfully in 1971, but transmitted for only 20 seconds before going silent. NASA lost Mars Observer in 1993, just as it was about to enter orbit. Mars Climate Orbiter crashed in 1999 because of a navigation error. One team used metric units, another used imperial, and no one noticed until it was too late. The European Space Agency's Beagle 2 lander reached Mars in 2003, but never communicated. Years later, images showed it sitting on the surface intact, but with solar panels that didn't fully deploy. And then there's Schiaparelli, another ESA lander which crashed in 2016 after its descent. Software miscalculated altitude. Mars is unforgiving, but every failure taught us something. Every crash, every lost signal, every mission that ended too soon gave us data, lessons, ways to do better next time. It seems as though Mars demands patience, precision, and the humility to accept that we don't always get it right. So, why do we keep trying? Why spend billions of dollars, decades of work on machines that might fail? Because Mars is the closest thing we have to a second Earth. A place where water flowed, where chemistry happened, where life might have begun. And because the question, are we alone, is one of the deepest questions we can ask. If we find life on Mars, it changes everything. It means biology isn't unique to Earth. It means the universe is full of possibility. And if we don't find life, that's profound too. It means Earth is rare, that we're an exception, not a rule, that life is fragile, precious, and worth protecting. Either way, the answer matters. Think about this. Right now, as you listen, there are robots on Mars. Perseverance is drilling into rocks. Curiosity is climbing a mountain. Ingenuity might be flying its rotors, spinning in the thin air. They're alone. Millions of miles from home, powered by sunlight or nuclear decay, following instructions sent by humans who will never see the places they explore. They're our eyes, our hands, our curiosity made metal, and they're showing us a world that was once perhaps alive, a world that might still hold secrets buried beneath the dust, waiting for us to dig deep enough. But even as we celebrate what rovers have found, we have to ask what comes next. Is this enough, or do we need something more? Because rovers can explore, they can drill, analyze, photograph, but they can't make the big decisions. They can't choose to change course when intuition whispers. They can't feel the ground beneath them and say, "Here, dig here." For that, we need more than machines. And that possibility of humans walking on Mars, feeling its dust, breathing through filters, looking up at Earth as a distant star, is closer than ever. But sending humans raises questions rovers never had to answer. Questions of ethics, of risk, of what it means to change a world that isn't ours. Let those questions rest gently in your mind, because the journey we've taken from Viking to Perseverance is only the beginning. And where it leads next will test not just our technology, but our wisdom. Imagine standing on Mars 100 years from now. You're not wearing a spacesuit, just a coat, because the air is thick enough to breathe, warm enough to feel. You look up and the sky isn't pale pink anymore. It's blue. Clouds drift overhead. Rain is falling somewhere over the horizon. And in the distance you see green, not rust, not dust, but plants. Life, growing. This isn't science fiction. It's a theory, a possibility, a dream that scientists call terraforming. The idea that we could take a dead world and make it live again. But here's the question. No one can answer yet. If we have the power to change an entire planet, should we? And if Mars still has life hidden beneath its surface, do we have the right to reshape a world that isn't empty, just quiet? Let's start with what terraforming actually means. The word comes from Latin, terra meaning earth, forming meaning to shape. Terraforming is the process of transforming a planet to make it more like Earth, warming it, thickening its atmosphere, creating conditions where humans could live without life support. It sounds impossible, and maybe it is. But scientists have been thinking about it seriously since the 1970s. and some believe it could be done. Not quickly, not easily, but eventually. The question is how research shows there are several strategies. Some involve releasing greenhouse gases to warm the planet. Others involve redirecting comets or asteroids to deliver water and volatiles. Some proposals are subtle, working with Mars's existing chemistry. Others are dramatic, bordering on violent. Let's explore a few. The first step in terraforming Mars would be warming it, because Mars is cold. Brutally cold. Average surface temperature is around -80 degrees Fahrenheit. At night, it can drop to -195 degrees. Why so cold? Because Mars has a thin atmosphere. On Earth, our thick blanket of air traps heat from the sun, keeping the planet warm. Mars doesn't have that. So if we want to warm Mars, we need to thicken the atmosphere. And to do that, we need gases. Specifically greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. Now here's the interesting part. Mars already has carbon dioxide, lots of it. The atmosphere is 95% CO2. The problem is the atmosphere is so thin that even though it's mostly greenhouse gas, there isn't enough of it to trap heat. But there's more CO2 locked away, in the polar ice caps, in the soil, in frozen reservoirs beneath the surface. Scientists suggest that if we could release that CO2, warm the poles, sublimate the dry ice, vaporize the frozen deposits, we could thicken the atmosphere. And a thicker atmosphere would trap more heat, which would release more CO2, which would trap even more heat. It's a feedback loop, a runaway warming effect. The same process that's causing problems on Earth could in theory save Mars. But here's the challenge. Recent studies suggest Mars might not have enough accessible CO2 to create a self-sustaining atmosphere. Even if we released every bit we could find, it might only raise the pressure to about 7% of Earth's. Better than now, but not enough to walk around without a spacesuit. It seems as though Mars might not have the raw materials we need, or at least not in the places we can reach. So, if CO2 isn't enough, what else could we do? Some scientists propose using other greenhouse gases, stronger ones. Gases like perfluorocarbons, PFCs. These are synthetic compounds thousands of times more effective at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. A small amount could have a massive warming effect. We'd need factories on Mars, machines pulling carbon and fluorine from the soil and atmosphere, synthesizing PFCs, releasing them into the air. It would take decades, maybe centuries, but in theory, it could work. Another idea, darken the poles. Mars's polar ice caps are bright white, reflecting sunlight back into space. If we could darken them, spread dust or algae designed to absorb heat, they'd warm up faster. The ice would sublimate, releasing CO2 and water vapor, thickening the atmosphere. And then there's the most dramatic idea: nuclear pulses. Some scientists, including Elon Musk, have suggested detonating nuclear weapons above Mars's poles. The heat and shock waves would vaporize the ice, releasing massive amounts of gas into the atmosphere. It's bold, aggressive, and controversial. Because even if it worked, do we really want to start terraforming a planet by bombing it? It seems as though every solution comes with consequences, and not all of them are easy to predict. Let's say we succeed. Let's say we warm Mars, thicken the atmosphere, and make it breathable. What comes next? Water. Because Mars is dry, the surface water is gone, locked in ice, or lost to space. If we want rivers and lakes, we need to bring water back. Some of it is already there, frozen underground. If we warm the planet, that ice would melt. But it might not be enough. One proposal involves redirecting comets or icy asteroids from the outer solar system, crashing them into Mars, delivering water, ammonia, and other volatiles. Each impact would release enormous amounts of material, gradually building up Mars's hydrosphere. But here's the problem. Redirecting asteroids is incredibly difficult and dangerous. One miscalculation and you could accidentally hit something you didn't intend to. Like Earth, Research shows that even if we could redirect asteroids safely, it would take hundreds or thousands of impacts to deliver enough water. That's not a quick process. It's a commitment spanning generations. It seems as though terraforming isn't something one generation could finish. It's a project for centuries, for civilizations, not individuals. But let's pause, because there's something we haven't talked about yet, something uncomfortable, something that keeps ethicists and astrobiologists awake at night. What if Mars already has life, not on the surface, not thriving, but hidden? Deep underground in brines or buried ice. Microbes that have survived for billions of years waiting in dormancy. If we terraform Mars, we'd be changing the environment completely, raising temperatures, adding gases, introducing Earth organisms, plants, bacteria, maybe even animals. And those changes might kill Martian life, or contaminate it, or erase it entirely before we ever have a chance to study it. Scientists call this forward contamination. The risk that we'll bring Earth life to Mars and destroy the native biosphere if it exists before we even know it's there. And here's the hard question. If Mars has life, even just bacteria, does it have rights? Does it deserve protection? Or does humanity's need for a second home outweigh the existence of microbes we've never met? There's a document that addresses this. It's called the Outer Space Treaty, signed in 1967 by over 100 countries, including the United States and Russia. Article 2 states that no nation can claim sovereignty over celestial bodies. Mars doesn't belong to anyone. It's not American, not Chinese, not European. It's unclaimed. But the treaty also includes a clause about planetary protection. It says we must avoid harmful contamination of space and celestial bodies. What does harmful contamination mean? The treaty doesn't specify, and that ambiguity leaves room for debate. Some argue that terraforming Mars would violate the spirit, if not the letter of the treaty. Others say the treaty was written before we understood Mars's potential, and it needs updating. And some believe that if Mars is lifeless, or if its life is only microbial, human colonization should take priority. Because intelligent conscious life, us, has more value than bacteria. But does it? That's a philosophical question, a moral one, and we don't have a clear answer. It seems as though the ethics of terraforming are as complex as the engineering. Let me ask you something. If you had the power to transform Mars, would you? Knowing it might take 500 years, knowing it might erase any life that's there, knowing the consequences could ripple in ways we can't predict. It's not an easy question, because terraforming isn't just about science. It's about values, about what we believe life is worth, about whether exploration means preservation or transformation or something in between. On Earth, we've changed the planet dramatically. We've drained lakes, cleared forests, reshaped coastlines. And we've learned often too late that changing ecosystems has consequences. Species go extinct, climates shift, balance breaks. Do we want to repeat that on Mars? Or can we learn from our mistakes and approach another world more carefully? Some scientists propose a middle path, limited terraforming, warming Mars, just enough to make colonization easier, but not so much that we erase any potential biosphere, creating habitats in domes or underground rather than reshaping the entire planet. Others say, go all the way, make Mars a second Earth, because humanity needs a backup, a fail-safe, in case something happens here. Research shows that both approaches have support, and both have risks. There's another question worth asking. How long would terraforming actually take? The optimistic estimates say 100 to 200 years. Start releasing greenhouse gases now, and by the 22nd century, Mars could be warm enough for liquid water to flow. But other estimates are far longer, 500 years, 1,000 years, maybe more. Because we don't just need warmth, we need a stable atmosphere. We need soil that can support plants. We need ecosystems that can sustain themselves. And here's the challenge. Mars has no magnetic field. That means the solar wind is constantly stripping away its atmosphere particle by particle. Even if we thicken the air, it will slowly leak into space. Scientists estimate that it would take tens of millions of years for the solar wind to strip away a thickened atmosphere. So on human timescales, it's not a deal breaker. But it does mean Mars will never hold on to an atmosphere as easily as Earth does. Some proposals suggest building an artificial magnetic shield, a satellite positioned between Mars and the Sun, generating a magnetic field strong enough to deflect the solar wind. It sounds like science fiction, but NASA scientists have studied it, and they say it's theoretically possible. It seems as though every problem has a potential solution. The question is whether we have the will, the resources, and the time to implement them. But let's be honest, terraforming might not happen at all. Not because it's impossible, but because it's hard, expensive, politically complicated. Who would pay for it? Governments, private companies, a coalition of nations, and who would benefit? The first colonists, future generations, humanity as a whole. And what if something goes wrong? What if we release gases that react in unexpected ways? What if we trigger dust storms that never end? What if we melt the ice and discover it's contaminated with something toxic? Terraforming is irreversible. Once you start, you can't undo it. You can't put the atmosphere back in the ice caps. You can't reclaim the planet's original state. That permanence is terrifying. And it's why some scientists argue we should proceed with extreme caution. Study Mars thoroughly first. Make sure we understand it completely. And only then, if we're certain, consider changing it. It seems as though the greatest risk isn't failure. It's succeeding in ways we didn't intend. There's a phrase that keeps coming up in discussions about Mars: planetary stewardship. The idea that we have a responsibility to care for other worlds, not just use them. On Earth, we've learned that ecosystems are fragile, that once you lose a species, it's gone forever. That balance matters. Mars doesn't have forests or oceans or animals, but it has a history, a geology, a chemistry, and possibly a biology we haven't discovered yet. If we terraform Mars, we're not just changing a planet. We're erasing a scientific record, a 4.5 billion year story written in rock and ice and dust. Some argue that story is worth preserving, that Mars should remain a natural monument, a place we study, but don't alter. Others say Mars is a resource, a future home, a lifeboat for humanity. And using it isn't destruction, it's survival. Both views have merit, and the tension between them will shape how we approach Mars in the decades to come. Think about this. Right now, Mars is silent, still, unchanged for billions of years. But humans are loud, we build, we reshape, we leave our mark. And soon, maybe within your lifetime, we'll have to decide. Do we leave Mars as it is? A monument to what planets become when water disappears and atmospheres fade? Or do we try to bring it back, to give it a second chance, to make it live again, even if that life is ours, not its own? There's no right answer, not yet. But the question is coming, and when it arrives, we'll need more than technology to answer it. We'll need wisdom, compassion, and the humility to admit we don't know everything. Because changing a world is easy compared to understanding one. And Mars, for all we've learned, is still a mystery. So rest in that uncertainty. Let it settle. Because the journey we've taken from ancient oceans to frozen soil, from methane mysteries to robotic explorers, is almost complete. But before we close, there's one more thing to hold. One more truth to carry into the quiet, that Mars, whether we change it or not, whether we find life or silence, has already changed us. It's made us question, wonder, dream. And that perhaps is the greatest discovery of all. We've traveled far together tonight, across oceans that disappeared billions of years ago, through dust that remembers rain, into soil that might still hold secrets and skies that once breathed differently. We've watched rovers roll across alien ground, their wheels carving the first human-made tracks on another world. We've listened to methane whisper mysteries, We've met microbes on Earth that survive the impossible, teaching us that life doesn't need comfort, only stubbornness. And we've asked the question that started this journey, the question that brought us here to this quiet moment drifting together through the story of Mars. Are we alone? Maybe, maybe not. But here's what we've learned. The question itself changes us. Let's take one more look at Mars, not through telescopes or data, but through what it means. For thousands of years, Mars was a light in the sky, a wanderer, a red dot that moved against the fixed stars, and because of that motion, ancient people named it after gods of war, Ares, Nergal, Mangala, always associated with fire-blood conflict. But we know now that Mars isn't angry, it's quiet, cold, patient. The red isn't blood, it's rust. Iron that once touched water oxidized slowly over eons, painting the planet in memory. And the silence. That's not emptiness, it's the sound of a world waiting, holding its history in layers of stone, in frozen lakes beneath the dust, in molecules drifting through thin air. It seems as though Mars is a mirror, and what we see in it depends on what we're looking for. Some people see Mars as a graveyard, a cautionary tale, a world that had everything Earth has, water, atmosphere, warmth, and lost it all. It's a reminder that planets aren't immortal, that atmospheres can vanish, that magnetic fields can fail, that what seems permanent can fade slowly until only echoes remain. When we look at Mars, we see what Earth could become. Not tomorrow, not in our lifetimes, but given enough time, enough change, Earth's story could end like Mars's did. That's sobering, humbling, and maybe necessary, because it teaches us that we're not separate from our planet. We depend on its air, its water, its delicate balance. And if we're not careful, we could lose it. It seems as though Mars whispers a warning. Treasure what you have, because it's more fragile than you think. But others see Mars differently, not as a graveyard, but as a beginning, a frontier, a place where humanity could start again. Earth is crowded, resources are finite, conflicts arise over land-water energy. And while we should absolutely protect and cherish our home, there's something compelling about the idea of a second chance, a blank slate, a world where we could build differently. Research shows that establishing a colony on Mars is technically possible. Difficult, yes. Expensive. Dangerous. But possible. SpaceX is building rockets designed to carry humans to Mars. NASA is developing habitats. Scientists are studying how to grow food in Martian soil, extract water from ice, generate oxygen from the atmosphere. Some estimates suggest the first crewed mission to Mars could happen in the 2030s. Not a quick visit, but a stay. Months, maybe years. Humans living on another planet for the first time in history. And if that happens, it will be one of the most significant moments in human existence. Not just exploration, expansion. The first step toward becoming a multi-planetary species. It seems as though Mars offers hope. Not escape, but possibility. A future where humanity isn't confined to one fragile world. But whether we see Mars as warning or hope as graveyard or frontier, the question of life remains. And it's the most profound question of all, because finding life on Mars, even just a single bacterium, would change everything. It would mean life isn't unique to Earth, that wherever the conditions allow chemistry becomes biology, that the universe isn't silent, it's full of potential, full of countless worlds where molecules organize, adapt, persist. And if life arose independently on Mars, then it probably arose on other worlds too. Moons orbiting Jupiter and Saturn, exoplanets and distant solar systems, places we can't reach yet, but places that might be teeming with biology we can't even imagine. Finding Martian life would mean we're not alone, not special, not the universe's only experiment in awareness. And that's beautiful, humbling, terrifying, and comforting all at once. But what if we don't find life? What if Mars is and always has been sterile? That answer is just as profound, because it would mean life is rare, that the conditions needed for biology to begin are so precise, so unlikely that even a world like Mars, wet for millions of years, chemically rich, geologically active, never cross that threshold. It would mean Earth is extraordinary, a cosmic lottery winner, a planet where everything lined up just right, where water stayed liquid, where a magnetic field held, where life not only began but endured, evolved, diversified into forests and oceans and minds capable of asking questions. If Mars is lifeless, then every tree, every bird, every person is a miracle. Not in a religious sense, but in a statistical one. Improbable, precious, irreplaceable. And maybe that would change how we treat this planet, how we see ourselves. Not as inevitable, but as lucky. Not as conquerors, but as stewards of something rare. It seems as though either answer life or no life carries weight, meaning responsibility. Here's what we know for certain. Mars was habitable. That's not speculation. It's facts supported by decades of research, thousands of images, countless measurements. Water flowed there. Lakes sat for millions of years. The chemistry of life, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, existed in abundance. And habitable doesn't mean comfortable. It just means possible. So the question isn't whether life could have started on Mars. The question is whether it did. And we don't know yet. We have clues. Methane, organic molecules, minerals that form in the presence of water. But clues aren't proof. The only way to know is to keep searching, to drill deeper, to send more missions, to bring samples home and study them with the most sensitive instruments we have. And maybe someday to send humans. Because robots are incredible, but they're limited. They can't improvise. They can't feel the ground and say, something's different here. They can't chase hunches. Humans can. Have you thought about what it would be like to stand on Mars yourself? Not in a spacesuit surrounded by machines and filters, but just there. Feeling the ground, looking at the horizon, seeing Earth as a bright star in the Martian sky. It's hard to imagine, and yet someone will. Maybe someone listening right now. Maybe someone not yet born who'll grow up in a world where Mars missions are routine, where interplanetary travel is normal. And when that person stands on Mars, they'll carry all of us with them. Every scientist who studied the data, every engineer who built the rovers, every person who looked up at the night sky and wondered. Because exploration isn't individual, it's collective. A shared dream passed from generation to generation, growing stronger each time. It seems as though Mars belongs to all of us, not as property, but as possibility. There's a phrase Carl Sagan used. He called Earth a pale blue dot, a single pixel of light in a vast dark cosmos. And he was right. From space, Earth is tiny, fragile, a speck of blue surrounded by endless black. But from Mars, Earth would look even smaller, a star among stars. Bright, yes, but distant. Almost unreachable. And maybe that perspective is what we need, to see ourselves not as the center of everything, but as part of something bigger. A universe that's old, vast, and full of worlds we're only beginning to understand. Mars teaches us scale, patience, humility. It reminds us that we're young, that our entire history, every war, every invention, every thought ever conceived is a blink in cosmic time. And yet, despite our smallness, we're here, asking questions, sending machines across millions of miles, trying to understand not just our world, but others. That's extraordinary. Not because it makes us special, but because it makes us curious. And curiosity maybe is the most human thing we have. So, where does this leave us? What do we take from this journey? Maybe just this, that Mars was wet, that it might have been alive, that it holds secrets we haven't uncovered yet, that life on Earth is resilient, adaptable, and far stranger than we ever imagined, that extremophiles thrive in places we thought were sterile, teaching us that impossible is often just not yet understood, that we've sent machines to Mars and they've shown us wonders, ancient rivers, organic molecules, methane mysteries, and they've prepared the way for what comes next. That the future of Mars, whether we terraform it, preserve it, or simply study it, depends on choices we haven't made yet. Choices about ethics, responsibility, and what it means to be stewards of more than one world. And that the question, are we alone, might never be fully answered, but asking it makes us better, wiser, more connected to the cosmos we inhabit. You know, there's something poetic about searching for life on a planet that seems dead. About believing despite the cold and dust and silence that something might still be there, waiting, surviving, holding on. It's optimistic, maybe even naive, but optimism has carried us this far. It built the rovers, it launched the missions. It keeps us looking up, even when the universe feels too big, too empty, too indifferent. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the search itself is the point. Not the destination, but the journey. Not the answer, but the question. Because whether we find life on Mars or not, we've already found something important. We've found that we care, that we wonder, that we're willing to spend decades, billions of dollars, countless hours of thought and work just to know. And that says something beautiful about us. It seems as though humanity, for all its flaws, is a species that dreams. And Mars is one of our greatest dreams. So, take a breath, a slow, deep breath. Let the dust of Mars settle in your mind. Let the story rest. We've walked across ancient seas. We've tasted salty soil. We've met microbes that refuse to die, and machines that explore on our behalf. We've imagined futures where Mars blooms and futures where it stays silent. And through it all, we've asked the question that won't let us go. The question that maybe doesn't need an answer. Just the courage to keep asking. Are we alone? The silence of Mars doesn't answer, but it listens. And maybe that's all we need. A place to ask. A world to wonder about. A red light in the night sky that reminds us there's always more to discover. Thank you for drifting with me tonight. For letting curiosity carry you across millions of miles, for resting in questions that don't have easy answers. Mars isn't finished with us, and we're not finished with Mars. There are more missions coming, more discoveries waiting, more mysteries hidden beneath the dust and the ice, in the thin whisper of methane rising from the ground. And when those discoveries come, we'll be here, quietly, gently, ready to explore them together. Until then, sleep well, dream softly, and know that somewhere millions of miles away, a red planet waits in silence, holding its secrets, watching, remembering, and maybe, just maybe, breathing. Good night,